So now you have entered the deep dark tunnel of creating a new thing, and you can't see the light of day. So some of my colleagues will tell you that I am not the most pleasant to be around when I am in the deep dark tunnel of video making and I can't see the light of day, and none of the footage I have seems to be working right, and I can't even fix the tiniest little thing when I'm editing, and I'm convinced that all of my work is complete garbage and it's just all gonna have to get junked and... Whew. Okay, deep breaths. I think it's time to step away from the expensive equipment and go have a piece of cake. Editing, for me at least, is both the hardest and also the most creatively fulfilling part of the video making process. I have such a love-hate relationship with editing because it's where I start to realize all the mistakes I made in the filming and the planning process, but it's also where, when I let it at least, my creativity guides me in directions that are better than I ever could have planned. Most of my best videos were okay to mediocre during the planning and the filming process, but when it came down to editing, that's where the magic happened. So how the heck do you do it? Well, there are lots of different ways to edit and many different kinds of styles and techniques and formats that you can use, but for me at least, it comes down to being playful and living into the creative process. You can stick to your script and your storyboard, and the reason you created those things was to make your editing life easier, but don't be afraid to try things in a slightly different order to enhance the flow of your video in some way. Or you can get playful with text to kind of decrease the unnecessary talking head content. Or maybe you infuse some really great pictures that amplify your message in some way. This is where you start to put the creative pieces of the puzzle together to make something new and different. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time reviewing different kinds of editing software, but I, or colleagues I know, recommend Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, and Wondershare Filmora, to name a few. There are also a bunch of free software options like iMovie, and now even YouTube itself has its own built-in video editor within its platform, so you can edit right from YouTube, which is kind of weird and cool. And a lot of phones and tablets come with video editing software built into them these days, which just makes editing on the go even easier. Basically, when you're first getting started with video making, you just need an editing program that will allow you to trim clips, overlay images, insert text, and add audio. And with most freeware video editing software these days, you can do most of those things pretty easily. The point of this edition of the Video Your Way series is not to walk you through how to edit in a particular software. Basically, I'd like to give you some pointers and some things to consider, and then I'd like to give you the opportunity to play around using the Jumpstart activity for the week, where you'll get to edit yours truly, however you want. I am not at all terrified by this. So let's start with some of the basic tools necessary for every editor's tool belt. So, confession time. I was about 4 years into video making before someone explained to me that the terms motion graphics and animation aren't necessarily interchangeable. Motion graphics generally refer to taking a static image or text and moving it on the screen in some way, whereas animation is making the thing itself move, kind of like this example. One is fairly straightforward, and the other is, well, let's just say I tend to hire out for that because that's kind of beyond my skill set. My guess is that for most of what you're doing, motion graphics will serve you just fine. In terms of text, you might use text on the screen to drive home a point that the speaker is making, provide some additional information that's not in the audio, or to denote a transition of some type. So you'll probably want to use photos or images for the same kinds of reasons that you would want to use text, to underscore or emphasize a point, or provide additional information about your content. You might also use images or B-roll to provide something visually compelling that complements what's being communicated in the video. Or in this case, has absolutely nothing to do with it, but we got a new puppy and isn't he adorable? Whether or not you decide to use music in your video is really up to you, and whether you think it will add to or detract from the content of your video. I know a lot of creators who do use background music or other sounds to amplify the tone of a video, and it can be a really effective way of making your content more engaging. But background music isn't essential either, and there have been many times when I've chosen not to include it because I feel like it actually detracts from the content. That said, whenever you're using music, or images for that matter, you need to consider the issue of copyright. Oof, copyright. I'm gonna need my cup of tea for this. So the landscape of copyright and how it's enforced on the internet is constantly changing. But at the point in which I made this video, which is late 2019, copyright enforcement is becoming a bigger and bigger deal online. Whether it's music, photos, images, graphics, or B-roll, you need to be sure that what you're using is something that you can use. So that Beyonce song you love? Yeah, no. That iconic image from the red carpet taken by Getty Images? Probably not. So what happens if you use copyrighted content that you haven't paid for the rights to use? On YouTube at least, minimally, you might end up with a copyright strike on your content, or on the other extreme, you'll end up with having your video taken down or your entire channel deleted. Sounds extreme? Well, it is, but it happens more often than you might think. But have no fear, there are a growing number of free and public domain image sites out there now. Some of my favorite image sites at the moment are Unsplash and Pixabay. In terms of music, YouTube actually offers a decent library of free music that you can use in your videos. Keep in mind that it's always good practice to cite the source of your music or your image, even if it's not required. You don't have to do this in the context of the video necessarily, but you could put it in the description section or maybe on the credits panel at the end of your video if that works for you. You can also buy the rights to use certain images or music via sites like iStockPhoto, Storyblocks, or MusicBed. You could also go down the rabbit hole of using different kinds of Creative Commons licenses. These are licenses granted by the copyright holders for people to use images or audio in specific ways. This is becoming more and more common, but it can be a little bit confusing, so be sure that you read up on the different kinds of Creative Commons licenses before you start using content. But what about cases where you're using copyrighted content in a way that might be called fair use? Fair use is a clause in copyright law that basically permits individuals to use small portions of copyrighted content for the purposes of criticism, news reporting, education, or research without the need for permission from the copyright holder. However, even if you as the video creator say that you use the content in a way that was fair use, the copyright holder can still contend that. And then you have to decide whether or not it's worth going to court over. Now, I've seen a lot of content creators use snippets of copyrighted content in a fair use way and not have any problems with it. But I've seen cases where others have had their videos taken down and copyright strikes have been issued against their channels because of what others might consider fair use. In other words, it's really messy and inconsistent. For my part, I tend to generally avoid using copyrighted content in any way in my videos, just to avoid the headache. That said, it is up to you to make this judgment call. I've also included some links to some other resources in the description section of this video for more on the copyright landscape in online video if you're interested in that sort of thing. Okay, enough of all of that. I want to turn to talk briefly about a few pro tips for all of you beginner editors out there. The first thing is editing out the uhs and ums and unnecessary pauses. This is especially relevant for interviews, and I will say that interviews are one of the hardest but also most creatively fulfilling types of videos to edit. Especially if you've got multiple interviewees and you have to link together everything they're saying into this like beautifully woven, coherent story that you're trying to tell. Whew! Gold star for anybody trying that right out of the gate. Often when people first start editing interviews, they'll leave in a lot of the filler language, the uhs and ums and stutters and pauses. Often they'll do this because they worry that taking out the uhs and ums will actually break up the visual look of the interview and be distracting to the viewer. And they're right, it is distracting. Definitely. However, this is where your B-roll and your images and your graphics can come in really handy, because the more concise you can make your audio, the better. And you can do this by overlaying your images or your B-roll over top of your audio cuts to give the illusion of succinct phrasing, when in actuality the interview is more long and rambling. Though YouTube and other online video algorithms currently tend to prefer longer form video, there is still something really beautiful about a concise video that gets a point across clearly and simply. Besides, many of your viewers aren't going to stick around and watch your 7.5-minute video when it could have been 3 minutes. Redundancy creates boredom. Saying the same thing over and over again just makes your listener tune out. So if you can make something shorter or more concise or more direct and to the point, you should maybe try to do that, because your viewers might lose their attention and focus if you keep rambling on and... See what I did there? In short, keep it short. Enter the jump cut. Okay, so that was a tad excessive, but you get the idea. Jump cuts are a pretty standard style, especially in online video, and it's basically when you jump from one image or scene to another very quickly without any transition or fade between them. Jump cuts tend to create a sense of energy or urgency, whereas a cross dissolve is a little softer. You might have a reason to use these different kinds of transitions at various points in the same video. Sometimes you want to draw your viewers' attention to something with a really abrupt cut, and other times you might want a smoother, more flowing feel to your video. Basically, think about the style and the personality that you're trying to convey in your video and how your transitions and cuts might serve that style. And as always, play around a little bit and see what works best for you. There is no way to know how much you're going to love or hate editing until you get going. So, get thinking on the questions to ponder for the week, and then try your hand at editing a little bit of my footage. I'm not at all terrified by this. Please be kind. Thanks as always for watching. If you're looking for a little bit more one-on-one guidance on your own video making project, please reach out via my website. I offer free 1-hour consultations to whoever wants to chat with me. You can also find some other posts and handouts and things over there that might be helpful for you along your video making journey. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time, and now go forth and edit my video your way.